There is something strange about becoming an adult. Most people believe it happens when you get your first job, or leave home, or start paying bills. But perhaps adulthood begins much earlier. Perhaps it begins the very first time you realize that being yourself comes with consequences. It doesn't seem important at first. One embarrassing moment, one awkward silence, one comment that stays with you longer than it should. You're too sensitive. You're too loud. You're too quiet. Why can't you be more like everyone else? No single sentence changes who you are, but thousands of them just might. Without realizing it, you begin collecting masks. One for school, another for work, one for friends, one for your family, one for strangers. Soon, you become so skilled at wearing them that nobody notices, not even you. Perhaps that's why one of the loneliest feelings in the world is being loved for someone you had to pretend to be. Because if they love the mask, would they still love you without it? The strange part is that society often rewards this transformation. The employee who never says they're overwhelmed is called reliable. The friend who hides their pain is called strong. The student who stops asking difficult questions is called mature. Every reward quietly teaches the same lesson. Hide a little more, smile a little longer, become a little easier to accept, until one day you wake up and realize you've spent years building a life that doesn't quite feel like yours. The tragedy isn't that we wear masks. Masks have always existed. The tragedy is forgetting that we're wearing one. More than a century ago, Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung noticed something fascinating. He believed every human being creates a social identity, not because we're dishonest, but because belonging has always been essential for survival. He called this identity the persona, from the Latin word meaning mask, not the mask worn by actors, but the invisible one we carry every day. And perhaps, without realizing it, many of us have become so loyal to the mask that we've abandoned the person beneath it. But this raises an uncomfortable question. If pretending slowly disconnects us from ourselves, why do almost all of us do it? Why would the mind willingly trade authenticity for approval? The answer begins long before adulthood. It begins with one of the oldest human fears, the fear of being left behind. Thousands of years ago, being rejected wasn't simply embarrassing, it was dangerous. To be separated from your tribe often meant death. No protection, no food, no one watching while you slept. For our ancestors, belonging wasn't a luxury, it was survival. And perhaps even though the world has changed, our nervous system hasn't. Today, most of us no longer fear being abandoned in the wilderness. Instead, we fear something much quieter: being judged, being rejected, being misunderstood, being different. The danger is no longer physical, it's social. Yet to the human brain, those feelings can seem almost as threatening, because somewhere deep inside us, the ancient fear of exclusion still whispers, if they don't accept you, you might not survive. Think about how often we edit ourselves. Not because someone asked us to, because we've learned to predict what people might reject. We rewrite messages before sending them. We hide opinions that might cause conflict. We laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We say, "I'm fine," even when we're quietly falling apart. Not because we're dishonest, but because honesty sometimes feels expensive. The strange thing about masks is that they rarely feel like lies. Most of the time, they feel responsible, professional, polite, necessary. We convince ourselves, I'm just being mature, I'm avoiding drama, I'm protecting other people. Sometimes that's true, but over time, a subtle question begins to emerge. If nobody ever sees the real me, who exactly are they loving? Carl Jung believed that the persona was never meant to replace the self. It was meant to protect it, like clothing protects the body. Useful, but never mistaken for the body itself. The tragedy begins when we forget the difference. Imagine wearing a heavy coat every single day. Eventually, you stop noticing the weight until someone asks you to take it off, and suddenly you realize you don't remember what it feels like to move without it. The persona works the same way. At first, it's something we wear. Eventually, it becomes someone we perform. Perhaps that's why so many successful people secretly feel like imposters. Not because they lack ability, but because every compliment lands on the mask instead of the person beneath it. They receive applause, yet still feel invisible, loved, yet unknown, surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. Because loneliness isn't always the absence of company. Sometimes it's the absence of being truly seen. Perhaps this explains something many of us have felt. That strange emptiness after achieving exactly what we thought would make us happy. The promotion, the relationship, the recognition, the applause. Everything looks right, yet something still feels missing. Maybe because success cannot satisfy a person who no longer knows who they are. But if living behind the mask slowly disconnects us from ourselves, why is it so frightening to take it off? Why do so many people continue performing, even when they're exhausted? Because beneath every mask, there is something most of us spend our entire lives trying not to face. Not the world, not other people, but ourselves. And Carl Jung believed that hidden place had a name: the shadow. If the persona is the person we show the world, then what happens to the person we hide? Carl Jung believed nothing truly disappears. Not your curiosity, not your sensitivity, not your creativity, not your fears, not your anger. The parts of yourself you bury do not die. They simply move somewhere deeper. He called this hidden place the shadow. But despite its name, the shadow isn't evil. It is simply everything you've learned not to be. Perhaps you once loved drawing, until someone told you it wasn't realistic. Perhaps you cried easily, until someone called you weak. Perhaps you asked too many questions, until people grew impatient. Perhaps you dreamed of a different life, until reality convinced you to settle. None of these moments seemed important, but together, they quietly shaped the person you became. Every time you abandoned a piece of yourself, the persona grew stronger, and the shadow grew larger. This doesn't happen because we're broken. It happens because we want love. From the very beginning, children learn a painful lesson. Certain parts of themselves are welcomed, others are not. If you're obedient, people smile. If you're successful, people celebrate. If you're agreeable, people keep you close. But what happens to the parts that receive no applause? They don't disappear. They simply wait, patiently, quietly, sometimes for decades. Have you ever met someone who suddenly quit a successful career to become an artist? Or someone who ended a relationship that looked perfect from the outside? People often call these moments midlife crises. Carl Jung saw something different. He believed they were often attempts to recover the life that had been forgotten. Not because success was meaningless, but because success had been built without the whole person. The world applauds achievement, but it cannot tell you whether your achievements belong to you or to the mask you've perfected. Some people spend 20 years climbing a ladder only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. Not because they failed, because they never stopped to ask, whose life am I actually living? Perhaps this explains a feeling many people struggle to describe. Everything in life appears successful, yet something inside whispers, "This isn't it." Not louder, just quieter than everything else. So quiet that years can pass before we finally hear it. The strange thing about ignoring yourself is that life doesn't become easier. It becomes quieter. You stop asking what excites you. You stop wondering what you believe. You stop noticing what hurts. Eventually, you stop expecting anything at all. From the outside, nothing seems wrong. From the inside, you've become a stranger. Perhaps that is why removing the mask feels so frightening. Not because we're afraid of who we'll become, but because we're no longer certain who we already are. And yet, Carl Jung believed this uncertainty wasn't the end of the journey, it was the beginning. Because the goal of life isn't becoming someone new, it's remembering the person you were before the world convinced you to become someone else. But remembering yourself is only the first step. The more difficult question is this: how do you live authentically in a world that still rewards the mask? Perhaps the answer isn't to throw the mask away. Perhaps it's learning when to wear it and when to finally set it down. If you've listened this far, perhaps you're wondering, should I stop wearing the mask? Carl Jung's answer would probably surprise you. He never believed the persona was the enemy. After all, every society needs roles: teachers, doctors, parents, friends. We all wear different faces depending on where life takes us. The problem was never the mask itself. The problem begins when the mask becomes the only face we know. There is nothing wrong with adapting. There is wisdom in knowing how to speak differently to a child than to a stranger. There is kindness in choosing words that protect rather than wound. But adaptation should never require abandonment, because every time you betray yourself, something inside remembers, quietly, patiently, waiting for the day you finally return. Perhaps becoming yourself isn't about creating someone new. Perhaps it's about returning to the curiosity you buried, the dreams you postponed, the kindness you learned to hide, the questions you stopped asking, the parts of yourself that never truly disappeared. Modern life tells us to become more successful, more productive, more admired, more visible. Carl Jung quietly suggested something different. Perhaps the greatest achievement is not becoming more, but becoming whole. Because a person can spend an entire lifetime building an impressive identity while neglecting the quiet soul that gave life meaning in the first place. The world may continue rewarding the mask. It probably always will. People often applaud confidence before sincerity, performance before authenticity, appearance before truth. But eventually, every applause fades, every audience goes home, every role comes to an end. And when that moment arrives, there is only one question that truly matters. When all the masks have been set down, will you recognize the person standing in the mirror? Perhaps that is why the journey toward authenticity isn't loud. It doesn't begin with quitting your job, or moving to another country, or changing everything overnight. Sometimes, it begins with something much smaller. Speaking one honest sentence, saying no without guilt, admitting you're tired, creating something no one may ever see, allowing yourself to exist without performing. Small moments, repeated often enough, become a different life. Perhaps the world will always reward your mask, but your life will always belong to the person beneath it. So before you spend another year trying to become someone the world will admire, ask yourself one quiet question. Who have I been when nobody was watching? Because perhaps the person you've been searching for has never been missing, only waiting beneath the mask for you to finally come home.